So hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you to the MoRE conference for asking us to come and present to you all. My name is Jon Shende. I'm a board member and original investor in this company called MyVayda. It is a identity risk analytics SaaS platform that has integrated machine learning with it. And Chris and I are going to talk a little bit about machine learning, a little bit about predictive analytics. But for me, the key thing when it comes to risk assessments, I think we should sit.
Okay.
Are, the data and what we are actually trying to do with data. So to frame it, I'm thinking everyone understands what risk assessments are. I'm a former chief information security officer, and risk assessments meant multiple things for me, as follows. We would do testing, technical testing on our systems, our applications, connected devices, and so on and so forth. But we would also look at the quantitative aspects of risk. For me, when it comes to risk assessment, it's key that we understand what the cost of risk is and the impact on a company's operations, as well as the cost to remediate those risks. And in risk calculations, we have things like single loss expectancy and annualized loss expectancies, which we use to calculate our risk, whether we're going to invest, how we're going to run investments, as well as how that affects the actual business operations itself. More so when it comes to insurance companies, it's really key that insurance companies have a keen understanding of risk itself, looking at all data available, and that's where predictive analytics and so on comes into place, where that impacts pricing, that impacts how they write policies, that also impacts whether they decide to underwrite or how they're going to underwrite risk to a business. I'll pass it over to Chris so he can add some color.
Sure. So it decides ultimately whether you want the client or not, because you have your risk tolerance, your risk appetite, and that's codified and pretty much formalized in your risk management policy in the company, which defines the basics. Because I want to pull back to the basics, the level set on certain things. We all, you and I do risk as if it's our DNA. Does everyone do risk analysis out here, or is there anyone? Okay, can you hear me better now? Yes. No? Should I just talk louder? Okay, I'll talk louder, and I'll let them catch up to the noise, that noise. But I will be talking about noise. But when we talk about risk assessment, we talk about what we want to protect. First of all, every company wants to protect something to keep them in business, to keep them sustained, right? So you have to have a risk policy, a risk appetite. You don't want to be passing money under the table or getting an incident like I understood that is happening right now outside, and result in danger physically, financially, reputationally, socially, and so on. So what you do is say, okay, how am I vulnerable? Think of yourself walking up to the castle doors, and it's your castle, it's your company, right? And you have a deep moat and hopefully very hungry alligators that are going to keep people out of the castle. Now, with a lot of risk, you don't have the luxury of saying the risk is outside, the risk is inside. You have a threat coming outside, you have a threat coming inside. Those threats coming outside means that you have to protect the entire castle versus what you used to want to protect, which, my crown jewels. However, if I can get into somewhere close to your crown jewels, I'm going to steal your crown jewels. We've seen Ocean's 11, Ocean's 12, and all that. You know how it works. Hey, it's Las Vegas. So it's just a matter, we want to make sure that we protect everything. And how do we do that? We build models. You know models.
Models.
Models are built by people, just like you and me and everyone here. These models are probabilistic, which means they're based on certain assumptions, absolute and non-absolute. And they have noise. They have noise because of bias and of a lot of variables that affect the bias. You come from this way of life, you come from that way of life, you come from that way, I do. So we set certain, have set certain expectations situationally, and these are built into these models, like it or not. And it influences the models left and right. We hope to get above a 20% correlation value to minimize that, and then we try to identify the noise and the source of that noise, and then minimize that, get our models as quickly as possible. I didn't want to go too far.
You know, and talking about models, so risk is around us all the time. Does everyone know what's going on outside, across the street? Apparently, there's a hostage situation at the Caesar's Palace, across the street. Took me an hour to get here from the airport because of the, yes. So the driver bringing me in, and we were talking about the risk, an inherent risk. And his question to me was, John, do you want me to just turn around and take you back to the airport? You know, and I did a quick calculation. I'm like, well, if it's occurring at the hotel, chances are, there's a 50% chance that everyone here is fine. I couldn't get in touch with Chris, so I started to panic. So I'm emailing him, Chris, are you okay? And then we didn't see any police car, like a block away, we didn't see any police cars. So I'm like, right away, the inherent risk decreased in my mind, right? So 75-25% at that juncture. So I told the driver, let's carry on. It took us probably 35 minutes to drive 3 blocks, which I've never experienced in all my life coming to Las Vegas. And it's been over 2 decades. So I got here, and the gentleman outside greeted me. I told him what I was here for, and I said, is everything okay? Yeah, he said to me, what are you talking about? So that concerned me in the sense that we're in a bubble here. What if that incident had spread across? What were the situation? What were our exit plans or strategy? So being a CISO, I grew up through physical security. Sandhurst, and some of my friends are very well connected. So I understand. So I started to do a situational analysis, looking where the exits were, looking to see what the traffic was like, looking to see if there was police presence. And with every single step I'm making, my panic is coming down because I'm not seeing anything as such. And then I walked in here and nobody knew what's going on. So for me, what did I just do? I started gathering data, right? Situational analysis, gathering data. And this is basically what inherent risk management is about. I was presenting to my CEO, a global SaaS company, and you know, she asked me, she said, what do you need to be successful here? And I said, data. And you know, her response to me was, what about tools? What about technologies? You know, and I said, we can have tools, we can have technologies, but if we don't have clean data, we can't make the right analysis and the right calculations for risk. And that's basically, in a nutshell, what risk is for me. We're talking about insurance and insurers and how they decide or how they move forward. So with machine learning and with predictive analytics, we still have to train data. Everyone is talking about AI today. In fact, I was in a meeting yesterday and the team asked me, hey John, what's your take on ChatGPT? And what's your take on AI? And to be frank, I'm not really impressed with ChatGPT yet. as a professional that's an expert in my field, because I ask ChatGPT questions, and it gives me generic answers, and I have to keep rephrasing to get the right data. And even so, sometimes the data is incorrect. So I still have to validate that data. So when it comes to insurance and it comes to predictive analytics and how we look at risk, where insurers are working towards getting the right results for them, looking at models. There's something called the Monte Carlo model. I have a story about the actual Monte Carlo and the risk I took on the Speedway. I was there on vacation a couple of years back. I'm a race car driver. I rally drive when I was younger. I have an old German Ford. And I got on the Monte Carlo Speedway, and I looked left, I looked right. The police guys were a little ways away. So I took a lap. I took a really quick lap, and I assessed that risk really quickly, and I came back out. And the policeman saw me. And then, as he was coming up to me, I said, hey, my maps were wrong, and I got lost. And that was an excuse, which he knew wasn't true. He could see it in his eyes. But he let me go. So data and having clean data and being able to predict on that clean data is really important. What the insurers do as they're using predictive analysis and machine learning is we are building models and we're training those models on data that we have. Now, where we think about data modeling is we have to look at how data is created, how data is stored, how data is used. We have structured data, which is things like our date of birth, our NIS number, our social security across here, and things that are defined. Then we have unstructured data, where there is a level of, I would say, correction sometimes that needs to take place with unstructured data. But we have to correlate that in a manner that when we feed that data into our predictive analytics machines, it makes sense. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a major manufacturer a couple of years back as a consultant to their CIO, and they had built a homegrown system that stored all their data. As with most CEOs, they hear about this cool tool and they want to get it. And they threw millions of dollars at it. $7 million later, $2 million over budget. They hadn't gotten what they needed out of the system. And when I walked in, I said, let me see your data maps. Everybody just looked at me. What are you talking about? I said, where are your data maps? Because if you're moving from system A to system B, you should be able to map your field, your formats, your content, accordingly. And nobody thought about that. The answer was, well, the CEO said he wanted it, so we got it. What we ended up doing was having to build a centralized system that took all the fields and systems and mapped it over to that centralized systems, clean that, verify that data, and then push it over to the cloud system, which added another $2 million to their bill. But
however, you could use the data then.
Or we could use the data then. But in essence, with predictive modeling, we have forward progression and backward progression, right? Because with forward, what we want to do is we want to test and validate our system. So we're training the model, and with the model, we're feeding it data from every single source we can find, but it has to be in a specific format and cleaned. Mm-hmm. And then we ask the system to predict the outcome of that data. We get that result. The next thing we do is we actually do a test production. And when we do that test production, we look at the results of what the test system does, and we compare it with the predictive system, and then we have a delta. Chris mentioned 20%. Mm-hmm. So we have that delta we look at to see if it's really working or not, and we can make adjustments accordingly from there. How does that benefit an insurer? Well, it eases the level of physical effort, manual effort that teams have to expend to get these systems working. But it also, with the delta that we find, we can then quantify risk better. And once we quantify risk better, we know then that we can adjust our pricing for policies, for underwriting, for saying no to a customer if they want insurance, right? Because you have to know that you can manage that risk if a claim comes. And with that predictive model, you can then look at fraud. There's a lot of fraud around. And looking at the model from a fraud perspective, we can see whether it's fraud from underwriting or from claims, and then we can build those deltas into the actual predictive model to sort of reduce the risk to the insurer. At that juncture, that will be underwriting the policy.
And may I interject right there? And that we talked about inherent risk, but that's what was just described as the bridge between inherent risk and residual risk, because you're adding those little techniques and controls in there, and you know, when you did the implementation versus the test, that's just the first part of life. You have to go beyond and say fine tune, find that bad band that describes fraud internally and externally. It's a both ways, and then do something about it, because your auditors, your shareholders, the press wants to hear about all that stuff that you didn't do. That meant that you sent those $100 million, like there's some consent decrees, I'm not going to mention which bank, out to people that it didn't belong to. Or in an insurance company, your Treasury Department is wacko. They don't know what they're doing, the money's going out, and it's like how, what, and why. And so that's the kind of thing that between an inherent risk and a residual risk, you're trying to put those controls in place so you could prove to everyone, hey, I thought about this. You thought about it. You were brought in to think about it. You thought, you said, here's what we need to do. It's going to cost money. So what? It's going to cost a lot more if you don't do it, because you may not be able to sustain yourself. That's, you want to stay in business. You want to grow. You want to remove those, I usually use this word a lot more, vulnerabilities, so that you can sustain. And I have a model it's called maximize scale, minimize vulnerabilities, MSMV. MSMV is very simple. It's what you have to do. Yes, the scale comes first in the model, but you have to minimize the vulnerabilities, but you have to always remind yourself, I have to keep on minimizing these vulnerabilities, or I'm not going to be able to scale. I'm going to get the wrong clients, I'm going to have too much fraud, I'm going to have too much homogenization of my, if I can use that word, of my profit. So they're going to be not too strong and not too predictable, and that's not what shareholders and investors like. I try to come from a business and a strategic standpoint. You come from an implementation, I appreciate it. You need a lot of people like him. So it's just a matter of getting that to where the CISO talks to the CEO, the CEO, oh, okay, I see what you're saying. We didn't, you know, it's not a bad judgment. But yeah, you hired me to tell you you're wrong. And that showed me that you're listening. If you say, well, you're right all the time, you're not listening to anybody. This is saying, I'm wrong, you are wrong because of this. It's not because you're a bad person, it's because we had to link it up, and here's how we do it right. And that's never, always never, that's never that complicated. It usually comes down to a very basic things. Take the time, look at the vulnerabilities, fix, test, retest, quantify, document, so all the people who want to see those things will be happy, and then move on.
That's a great point about documentation, because from a legal perspective, I have had the, I wouldn't say pleasure, but I've had the opportunity to interact with a lot of attorneys over the years. As a technologist, you know, everyone thinks about technology as some murky, you know, pseudoscience kind of thing that sits in a dark corner and make things happen. The reality is security and technology and risk management has come a long way in the last 13 years, especially with the improvement in technologies as we have seen them. when it comes to security, I usually tell leadership that it's a business function. It can't be a technology issue. Those are just tools. And those tools have to be optimized and cost managed efficiently, because that is a line item for the CFO, and that line item must be able to be justified from a loss expectancy perspective as well as a spend perspective. When I present to the board, in fact, I shared a slide. I did an entire, it was just a spreadsheet, basically, that talked about single loss expectancies, annual loss expectancies, cost of investments, cost of risks, and the event of a risk going viral. What do? We have to get legal involved. We have to get external consultants and forensics analysis involved. And when we think about risk and risk management, we have to think about what are the legal implications at the end of the day. Because if we go to court over an issue, a vulnerability or a breach or a cyber threat, in court we have to provide irrefutable evidence that something happened in a particular way.
And the forensic path that you took to put that evidence together and what you're going to do in what time, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Do we have to take questions? But I know we have like 6 minutes, and anyone have questions?
So let's ask some questions.
Let's ask some questions.
How much let's raise hands. Who's concerned about AI and the impact it'll have on you personally and professionally? Big question. Maybe not? Is there anyone really? Okay, heat map. Cold or hot? Really hot? Really high. Everyone else high? Okay, so it's linking to your sales and your revenues you produce, and you're high because of what? Okay, so you're high because you're concerned about the risks and vulnerabilities and what AI could possibly do to your job? Okay, to automate it, fine. So now we're concerned about AI taking over, right? How, you want to answer a question about what should how should their concerns be?
We have some time still, you know. To your point about the pricing and the profitability part, what we're using is, you know, a lot more machine learning and predictive analytics and so on. AI has to get really sentient for me to be very concerned, right? And we're not there yet, unless we believe the stuff about Google. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to that, the key things that we're using from a business perspective is the data that we're feeding into these models. So we're looking at market analysis, analysts analysis, competitive analysis, you know, and then we can do pricing, we can do movements, we can do positioning based on that data itself. To say that we're saying, hey, whatever we name the thing, can you tell me which market I could go after and what's my profitability? And it'll give you a response. We're not there yet. You know, we still have to put data to train the system to respond to us. And even so, we have to have oversight. We need the actuaries still. We need folks like yourself that has a pulse of the market, because this thing isn't sentient. So it can't say, I feel. No. You ask it a question, you give it data input, and it will output data. Like you remember the old word processors back in the day. So it's simple, input, output, right? Yes, we are using, we have data available where, because of the compute capacity we have, we're able to calculate and we're able to model and we're able to forecast based on all of that data, which makes it look like, whoa, this thing is thinking on its own. Right? But it still needs data, and it still needs to be trained, so it's not yet thinking on its own.
That's a key point, because when you are totally blindly relying on what AI produces, you're only kidding yourself. It can only deal and only produce data that's reasonable and usable to a certain extent from the data that it has. If it has no data, AI will tend to make it up. That's the danger. That's where you have to have smart people like this guy. And you have to have controls in place where it's a human model. You are trying to create and refine that human model. And you have to always do that because there's always going to be variables that are going to change those assumptions, change your bias. And the problem with AI is you're building a model on top of a model on top of a model on top of bad data. What do you expect to get? You know? So it's just a matter of let's ask the basic question. Is this real? Does this seem real to you? You have the experience. You know what it should be. If it doesn't, question it. Always. Because you're only doing the benefit to the company by saying, hey, I think you're wrong. Here's why. You're not a bad person. I just think this is wrong because of this and this and this. Have they tested that?
Mm-hmm. I'll give you an example. We were, everyone familiar with SOX 404? It's basically a regulation where publicly traded companies, they have a third-party auditor comes in and they run some audits on their systems and so on, financial statements, and tech somehow got tied into that with something called IT General Controls, right, ITGC, where you have to prove that you're doing certain things for the auditor to pass you, basically. We were doing something for a global customer where the audit firm that was working with this customer took about 3 months to get the work done, collecting the data, analyzing the data, validating, verifying, cleaning. With our system, it's built on machine learning. We just took raw data and we threw it at the system. And we said, figure it out. And figure it out meant we created a model of how it should analyze the data. We tested that. We validated the test was as it should be to meet the legal requirements as well as the regulatory and audit requirements. And then we gave it to the auditors. And they took the data, 3 months worth of work from the year before. They did the same collection and they put our system in place. And in 8 hours, we were done. But that didn't mean they were done. We were able to do the analytics based on the parameters we told the system. Here is what we want you to look for. This is what we want you to analyze. And here is a suggested output. Add your recommendation from a predictive analytics perspective. And the system did that. The auditor had to still verify that. But instead of spending 3 months, they basically just spent, I think, another three or 4 days doing that. So I hope that makes sense. And sir, the question was about vulnerabilities.
There is a question about vulnerabilities back there? Anyone? We're out of time. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you,
We
John.
appreciate your unique perspectives on that topic. Thank you so much.